takes power? What happens when she won't back down? What happens when a woman takes power? What happens?
Welcome, Darshi. It is a pleasure to welcome you to the Magnolias. Darshi is a friend who I admire on so many levels. She's brilliant. She's a model of integrity, curiosity, kindness, entrepreneurial generosity. She's got a big heart along with strategic thinking to accompany her big heart. And among many talents, she's an accountant and serial entrepreneur and philanthropist. I really could go on and on. It is my joy to share her with the Magnolia family. And I just want to share a few just very basic headlines about Darshi before we go into questions. She's a graduate of said business school, Oxford, and Cambridge University. We took an appreciative inquiry certification class together from Professor David Cooperrider, which was a lot of fun. Darshi lives in London, has a getaway or a retreat in the beautiful Azores Islands, which I hope to visit someday. She's the mother of a whip-smart 12-year-old daughter, Tara. Darshi has been an executive coach to CEOs at the highest levels of industry. And Darshi is the founder and CEO of Maanch, a tech platform that she created, dedicated to helping companies fund causes aligned with the UN Sustainable Development Goals, something very close to the Magnolia hearts. And of course, we're going to talk more about that later. Darshi's accomplishments and gifts evolved out of a childhood in extreme poverty and hardship and a gross lack of equality. And I'd like to just start at the beginning by asking you to describe your early life in Mumbai, and then, how you transcended poverty to rise out of it and give back to the world in the way that you do.
Thank you. And it is a joy to be able to share some of these insights, in particular with a community that also has at heart aligned action in mind and can also galvanize forces around them for such cause. I think, like you said, Roberta, my childhood wasn't the easiest. Yet at the same time, I think what's interesting is I never thought of it when I was a child that I had a hard life. It was only when I grew up and I saw the inequalities around when my friends could go on holidays to not just international destinations, but just outside of Mumbai, and my family couldn't afford it. That's when these questions would come up, like, why can't I and why can't we? And there were times where we couldn't pay school fees, and in India we have this amazing social web. So someone or the other comes out and helps you. The aunt will help with a little bit here, and the vegetable vendor will not charge you for a month but still give you vegetables on credit. So you kind of get on with life, and for me it was very much like that, where we got on with life and we had challenges, but my parents never allowed it to color our world with a sense of limitation. And I think that's been the biggest gift in my life, where I was not limited by lack of resources around me, because our parents really, I have siblings, younger brother and a younger sister. And what our parents were fantastic at was ensuring that we had the best quality food and ensuring that we had the best quality education, which I think is the essence or the basics of having a good quality life. And of course, all of that goes with feeling loved and feeling part of a community. And I think it's those sort of basic building blocks to being a human being is, I think, what society needs in order for us to evolve from where we are, which is deeply imbalanced, to a more balanced society. I don't think it's just money. I think it's the access to resource to be able to have a worthy life. And that's why I say my work is not so much about just, sort of giving money from one part of society to another. It's a lot about creating access. So I'll stop there, but maybe I'll share more sort of personalized stories as we go along. But I think I would say, yeah, that's really the essence of, yeah.
I remember you talking about studying for your accounting degree by the light of a candle because you had no electricity. Can you say more about that? And, how hopeful were you that you would, get through it with flying colors as you did?
Yeah, I think any professional exam, you're never really sure until the results come out. In India, in particular, it's particularly competitive. So in India, of course, for me, education was something that was really something that our parents wanted us to focus on. And especially for me as a woman, it was very rare. I'm the first educated girl child in the family. So my parents took a lot of slack and from our neighbors and relatives, like, why do you want to educate your child, and why do you want to spend your money sending her for a technology lesson? Like, isn't that excessive? Like, you shouldn't be going into debt for educating your girl child. You're going to marry her anyways. Like, it's waste of money. So I saw my parents really hold that line and still invest in me and in creating opportunities. So for me, when I was growing up, especially, as an 18-year-old young person, feeling slightly, sort of labored now with inequalities. My friends could go to parties, I could not, because we couldn't afford. My friends could go to movies, I couldn't afford to even buy a ticket to go to the movies. So this is where, sort of the pressure built on, and I felt, okay, I have to break through this challenge. And the one way I know I can do this is if I can qualify with a good degree and get a professional qualification and get a really good job. So at that stage, I would say the primary question that was running all my life action was, how do I break us out of this poverty cycle? And that's when I figured, okay, I need to get a job at a bank, and in order to get a good job at a good bank, I need to be an accountant, and to be an accountant, I need to pass this exam. 100,000 students write this exam every single attempt, and only 1,000 pass. So that's a 0.01% probability of pass. And it was during these exams where for 3 months in a row, my parents had not paid electricity bills because we didn't have money. And on the night of the first exam, the guys came around and they cut off the supply for electricity to our home. And it was this night where, after a lot of like turmoil in the day, because you can, there's a lot of emotion running through, but when the night came, my brother and sister and I, we were still sharing the same bed, and they were sleeping on either side of me. I had a little table and a candle, and I said, tonight I cannot cry. I cannot say, oh, this is not fair, and I can't miss this chance. I have this one chance to pass. And if I don't miss this, I have 6 more months of drudgery until the next exam run comes around. And so, yeah, that night I didn't cry. I just studied through the night, went to the exam next day, and they have 8 exams in a row. So they really, like, by the 8th day, you're so exhausted just from this marathon of exams. And 2 months later they announced the results, and I came 47th in the entire country.
Wow.
So it was this moment of just the rush of joy, and on the one exam, the first one, I actually just passed. So I could have just got 1 mark less and I would have failed, and I would have had to write the entire set of exams all over again. But it was just grace, hard work, and I feel a lot of grace in seeing me through. And the outcome of that was I got opportunities to work with the best banks. I got offers from 4 leading banks: JP Morgan, Citibank, you probably heard of these 2 names, Standard Chartered, which is a British bank. They're big in Asia. It was India's largest foreign bank, as well as India's biggest bank, ICICI. It's a national bank. And for me, that was the opening into another challenge, but at least the first challenge to sort of evolve ourselves out of that cycle. I was there.
Can you say a little bit about the caste system in terms of the inequality of that also?
Yeah, so in India, we have a caste system, and especially now it's not as rigid, but especially during the time I was growing up, but even more so in the previous generations, it was extremely hard to jump from one caste to another. So if you are, and Zoroastrian, probably Jacqueline, you may relate to it as well. Zoroastrian is a closed caste. So they do not even allow, they do not recognize marriage with anyone from any other caste. And similarly, we have rankings as well within the caste system. So my dad comes from a farming family in a remote village. And so we have something called the scheduled caste. So these are castes which are recognized as the lowest caste in society. And then if you study, etc., you get like special quotas. But otherwise, no one marries anyone from that caste other than the caste itself. So my dad comes from a scheduled caste family, and he decided he didn't want to live in the village. He had his own boundaries that he broke through during his young age, came to the city. I imagine some of it is genetically transferred to me, where I decided to sort of expand the boundaries he he didn't expand in his lifetime. But yeah.
Well, I want to zoom forward to the amazing entrepreneurial Maanch that you've created. And just to start with, what does Maanch mean?
Maanch means platform in Hindi. And this is really born from, the earlier question I said, which was, I wanted to take my family out from this challenge of poverty. I think life is evolutionary, and like you mentioned, my story is evolutionary, and that's how I see. I grew from one challenge to another and to another. And as I grew from living and working in Mumbai in India, I met Rowan, and I'll leave that for, sort of another dinner and wine conversation of how I broke through like the personal challenges of and relational challenges of having
An older
cross-cultural
husband.
marriage. Yes. And lived and worked in Indonesia, Jakarta. And then as my consciousness evolved, and I was not so worried about my Maslow's needs hierarchy, you'd say the base needs, question for me was, okay, and what more? And now I can fly first class from one destination to another. I've sort of achieved that. Is life really just about that? And what if the whole world is my family? And I embrace a larger definition of family. I embrace a larger definition of issues and challenges. And we look at climate change and social inequalities that are more global in nature. Question for me was, okay, if I could do that with my little family, what is the blueprint, and how can we work that with the larger global family? And for me, Maanch is my experiment in bringing all my learning as a banker, and also since between banking and starting of Maanch, I trained as a coach trainer, so bringing in my skill sets around leadership and executive and organizational transformation, bringing that together, and systems change, I think, has been a driver for me in transitioning from this organizational mindset to a broader mindset. So how do we bring all of the things we know that work, and also all of the things we know don't work or are still missing gaps? How do I bring that all together in one umbrella? So for me, Maanch is my expression of innovating on how we can come together and align as a global community to deliver a global solution for the challenges we all have. And of course, the road to or the pathway to moon is not as easy. So I've tried to break my own journey down into little steps. And the way I think of Maanch is that every money that we give, we spend, and we invest has impact on people and planet around us. And at the moment, these data points around how this transaction is going to impact people and community and the environment is not part of the financial decision making mechanism. And that's what the role of Munch is leveraging technology to enable these data sets to become accessible to financial decision makers. And it can be an individual making a small grant of $1 to a project somewhere in Mexico, or it could be 100 million check that goes to funding a solar powered station or a solar powered village somewhere in Africa. All of these transactions have an impact in the immediate, but also in the long run. And we now have these statistics, we have these data sets, and I presented some of this at the UN. And that was really the catalytic point where I said, I'm not coming back to the UN as a consultant and telling them what you can do with this data. I'm actually going to build something and show how it works.
Beautiful. You are so aligned with the Magnolia hearts and mission in terms of bridging divides and in support of achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. And I'm wondering, what your thinking is as somebody who monitors this so closely and is so actively pursuing how to financially support achieving the SDGs. How would you say we are doing globally?
My honest answer is it's all still a mess. And there is progress. It's very slow. And I think sometime soon we will all realize that the cost of inaction is going to cost us quite a lot. So I feel the need for speed. There are many systemic challenges. A lot of them have to do with resistance and lack of resources allocated towards this transition. So I think even where people really want to make the shift, they do not have the resources, whether it's to hire new people or hire tech or anything else to actually make that shift from A to B. So I think there are many challenges. On the hopeful side, we are also seeing a burst of innovation. So Munch is not the only solution. And what's happening is I would say, very pointed solutions that help with specific challenges. And what we are playing role at Munch is to be able to join the dots. So not actually creating yet another solution. Our solution is to be able to connect what's being done by individuals, by organizations, and bring all of that data, clean it up, and so that we have a visual map of where money is going, where there are still gaps.
Darshi, in terms of this sort of burst of innovation and your pointed solutions, can you translate that to some stories? Put it in narrative form.
Yes, so I'll maybe share my stories in the 3 dimensions I just mentioned. So the first one I'll speak of is innovation in the space of philanthropy. So we've seen a whole burst of platforms that enable now the giving of funding. And before, it was very hard to crowdfund for nonprofits. And so that's what I mean. There is innovation happening. There is technologies enabling connection. And where we come in at Munch is uncovering, so what else is needed to enable the transfer or the easy mobilization of funds to nonprofits. And what we've discovered is there are 2 challenges that still remain unaddressed, and or 2 systemic challenges that can massively increase the speed with which high impact projects get funded. And the first one is due diligence. So many nonprofits go through due diligence multiple number of times with multiple funders, submitting the same information and or similar information readapted in different ways to procure funding. And I think if we could align on and or enable systems to be able to capture these data sets and timestamp them, so charities or nonprofits can actually build their credibility online, and they can get funded based on the traction, that's when we can see the speed of funding happen in the landscape. So Jacqueline, to your point about like what innovations are happening, there are innovations that help the mobilization of capital, but there is still lack of innovation around who to give funds to. And that's where we find these gaps that are still limitations for actually enabling the full transition of funds. Another example is we've not so much in the US, but in Europe, we're already seeing regulations come in, like the SFDR, Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulation. We also have regulations around the Task Force for Climate Disclosures. So these are regulatory forces that are now requiring large asset managers and companies to start reporting on climate data and other sustainability data. And what we're starting to see is many for-profit organizations that help carbon accounting or help with little bits of the regulation. But there aren't innovations that join it up. And the solutions that exist out there are many times what I would call tick the box. They're not actually helping systemically solve the challenge that the company actually needs to embrace a more sustainable rehaul of their product lines, sustainable rehaul of their supply chain. So these solutions don't help at the level of actually enabling businesses to readapt their business practices to where it needs to be going. So that's where I would say there are innovations that help companies get on the journey, which is a really good thing. And then there are solutions that need to help company make those difficult choices and still provide value to their entire stakeholder system, not just to one stakeholder in their ecosystem.
And do you see a lot of greenwashing in terms of what companies say about themselves versus what they do?
Yeah, I would say greenwashing is obviously, sort of a stick that's come up, and it's creating a big hoo-ha here, especially in Europe or this side of the pond. I would say, in many ways, it's again an evolutionary practice. I think before it was recognized that businesses had to find a way to report on volunteer hours and various things, and sometimes there weren't the kind of systems or the rigor or the methodology on how you compute some of these social credits that as a business you start to acquire. And so businesses started to use whatever methodologies to say we've created X impact in society. And I think now, as the benchmarks and standards bodies come into the picture, and they start looking at these non-financial indicators and start to put stringent measurement practices around it, then a lot of what was prior categorized as really good stories or really good impact can now be counted as greenwashing. So I am very slow to sort of punish businesses that are greenwashing. I think those that are doing it, I think it's a sign that they recognize that they need to incorporate these non-financial factors. I think the next step is then to help them bring the rigor, to bring the data trail, to bring a more aligned benchmarking and practice. So helping those who are under the sort of, under the bat of, are you greenwashing? Just helping them either, sort of disclose how they've done, if they've done it well, or propose how they are going to change ways so that they can do it more accurately.
And Darshi, what's your perspective, or how concerned are you about corporate welfare to the extraction industry instead of, supporting green energy?
I think the way I describe it is like we have a few sunset industries, and it's like sunrises and the sun sets. But the reality is the sun always is there. It just depends on where the earth is moving, that it's either sunrise or sunset. And I think the same with extractive industries. I don't think that we will be able to say a complete goodbye to them. But as we are starting to see innovation in circular economy models and reuse, I think the dependence on extraction as a primary medium of manufacture and development, that will change quite a lot. And I think we will see a lot more innovation in readaptation of what we've extracted. And I think that's where the future of industries is. And that's where I'm hedging my bets in terms of the kind of industries that will innovate around reusing materials and creating hybrid materials or combining materials to create something even more sustainable and long-term driven. I think that's where our innovation and our needs will go towards. I think we all know in terms of green energy that all that we are labeling as green energy is not also green either. Yes. So I think we're going to see a lot of change in that in the current green energy space as well.
I love the poetry of your sunrise and sunset happening all at once around the world. Darcy has a question, so jump in.
Yeah.
Oh, I have so many questions, Darcy. I would love to just sit down over a glass of wine and go. You started to talk about, what we now call the circular economy. And some businesses are really stepping up and working to innovate to actually achieve that. I'm wondering if you have some examples of companies that are really making progress on that, and what you think the biggest challenges are. And then an associated question is, what role do you believe the Wall Streets of the world play in our ability or inability to actually really step up to the level of sustainable, green, circular economy business practices that's needed so urgently?
Yeah. In terms of companies, I would say there are sectors that are really embracing circular economy. So I would say like the fashion industry, I can see already a huge number of new startups that are embracing circular economy as the way of defying some of the big players in the system. We're also seeing adaptations of circular economy in the packaging industry, although it's not become an inclusive practice yet. And I think part of that, speaks to the challenges, which is there are businesses that have long drawn contracts on a lot of unsustainable providers. So for them to transition to a cleaner, greener option, it's still a couple of years until the current contract expires, and then they will be able to make those changes. So I think there are some economic incentives that can be added to close contract and transition to greener contracts. Especially I'm thinking of for FMCG sector, where plastic is such a big challenge. So I think this we have seen innovation like the beeswax wraps, and there are lots of other the sea kelp plastic, etc. So we're seeing bioplastic and innovations in biopaper as well. But how do we make those mainframe, and how do we scale them? That's where the funding, the innovation, and the market is lacking. So there is a will, there are innovations, but the challenge is the transition. In terms of Wall Street and finance, I think there are Wall Street, or just even if it's not Wall Street, it's just finance and investors. The challenge is that we still have a large number, like in terms of population, a huge number of people in Western economies who rely on pension income. And that means these vehicles that deliver this pension income, they need ready cash to pay these income amounts month on month. And at the moment, the biggest industries that pay this cash amount is the oil, the gas, telecoms, fashion, because these are like FMCG. So all of these sectors that actually generate cash day in, day out to the retail sector is what pays people the pension. Now, if any of these businesses suddenly adopt a greener practice there has to be an immediate cash benefit that comes out from it for them to make that transition. Otherwise, they will not be able to pay the monthly promises of cash, and then that has an immediate impact on our current high age population. And what's not happening at this point in time is for younger generation, and we know like more than 50% of the world's working population is millennial and or younger, our monies are not going into what I call the sunrise technologies. So when this money of younger adults who are working adults who are paying their monthly salaries into pension funds, there is a huge opportunity to take that money and invest that in greener, cleaner, circular economy innovations, because the payouts we need are going to be 30 years from now. So we can actually wait to give our and fund businesses that actually need this capital now. So I think, yeah, financial services need to be able to have those systems where they can actually see the flow of funds, not from, I've got now 100 million to give away, and how can I get the most of that, to how am I going to, of this 100 million, 50 million comes where this 50 million is patient capital. How do I invest this 50 million different to how this other 50 million needs to be invested?
I just want to say that's the best answer I've ever received around how Wall Street is part of the stuckness of this problem. So thank you.
Pleasure.
Yeah, that was very enlightening. Thank you for that.
Yeah, always illuminating. And I actually want to jump back into a more personal side of your brain and heart, which is, I'm just curious how your daughter, Tara, is looking at her future, given, you know, a 12-year-old going through a pandemic and climate crisis and growing chasm between rich and poor. How is Tara processing the world that she's in?
I think it's even more challenging a future for them, because they really, I feel they're, and especially like Tara's generation, I think a lot of their formative years where they bond as friends was taken away with 2 years almost with lockdown. I think with younger kids, it was challenging for the parents, but the kids didn't notice as much. But for children in that teenage period, so anything from 10 to 18, where being social and being out of the family context is key, I think they were challenged a lot. I think they're also digitally native. So in terms of connectivity, I find that it's going to be more easy for them to collaborate and work together. And yet the challenge on the other side of collaboration for them is how the current tech that is focused on this younger generation is so focused on me and how many likes I have and over my friend and TikTok, which is me on a stage. And so everything is about me, centering me. There are not as many solutions for bringing them together as a community. So I would say what we invest in now for this generation is going to define how they will be when they grow up. In terms of inequalities, I think with Tara, she has seen India and been with me firsthand, and she's been in our homes, which are, you know, by Western standards, impeccable and zen. And then she's also been at my home in Mumbai, where, you know, the glass is here the one day and the other day you pick the glass from somewhere else. We all sit on the floor and eat food with our fingers. And so it's a very different culture. And I feel like for her personally, she has the blessing of having had, you know, sort of the knife fork, you know, knife on the right and fork on the left, table seating with grandmom in Scotland, and then no table manners at all with grandma in India.
That's beautiful. Lucky girl.
Yeah, exactly. So she's able to blend with both, which is a good thing.
Tanya has a question. Jump in, please.
Yes, I hope I make sense asking this. So you were talking about greenwashing, and I did not understand greenwashing, so I just kind of looked it up while I was sitting here. So if this question or definition is wrong, so from what I understand, you prices are increased on such items such as recycled paper towels or toilet paper. And when I read that, I thought about, well, not everyone can afford or have access to this thing that should be accessible to everyone. So how do you make eco-friendly accessible to everyone? Is my first question. Then my second question is, how would you encourage young ladies raised in a similar situation as you were raised to keep going and keep pressing?
Thank you. On greenwashing, I think there is a beautiful English word. There is a knowledge disparity. So what is needed is almost like a platform where you can find green solutions, and it does not exist, or maybe it exists in, again, micro industries. So if you're in fashion, you can find maybe like recycled clothing or things like that, but it's not pervasive, and it's not necessarily at the scale where large businesses can tap onto. For example, if Unilever decides tomorrow, hey, I'm going all green with all my plastic, there is no business yet that actually has the production capacity at the scale Unilever needs across all the geographies to be able to become a transition solution for Unilever, for an organization like Unilever. And that's what I mean, that investment is lacking in the space to scale up some of these innovations. And therefore, to answer your question, and therefore there aren't places that you can go to and find these solutions. They might, like, for example, some countries like Germany are quite advanced. So, within Germany, I imagine there are platforms where you can find traders and you can find easy replaceable solutions. And I'm using, again, Germany as sort of a placeholder country. I imagine Scandinavia as well, and a few countries as well. I think also in countries like India, Africa, Latin America, for a long time, when we look at SDGs and SDG 12 in particular, sustainable production and consumption, when we look at the global data, we can actually see that it's the Western countries that are in the red and orange, and it's the Asia, Africa, and Latin belt, which actually has the lowest challenge in responsible production and consumption. So there are many practices that I knew even growing up as a young person in India. We never ate out of plastic cups or drank out of plastic cups or plastic plates. We always had plant-based material, and you could find that anywhere and everywhere. Now, if you could scale that, and that could be available to larger countries or larger businesses, that's how we'll, sort of move towards a more greener transition, greener option. But until then, I think some amount of greenwashing will prevail till we find better solutions.
Tara was peddling the air behind you. I was wondering if she could answer Tanya's question.
Yep.
If she
Join me.
I remember having a conversation with you, Tara, when you were 7 years old about synchronicity. And I learned a lot. You may not remember it, but it was profoundly memorable for me. So thank you for that. So Tanya, do you want to ask your question of Tara?
Tara, the question is, what could young women do to help with more sustainable practices globally? If you have your thoughts, but also I think there was an earlier question of what are your biggest challenges and what is your vision for the future? If you want to answer that question.
Wait, which one am I answering?
Whichever you'd like to answer.
Of whatever you feel like, whatever moves you.
Just give us a stream of your consciousness, and then I can.
I'll answer the first one. Which was, what can people, like young women, do to make the planet more sustainable?
Yeah.
Well, I think it's not only what they can do, but how you get them to do that. Because I can tell you one thing, which is women or girls my age aren't really interested in saving the planet. That's the truth, really. In my school, like, sure, I'm part of campaigns and stuff, but nobody else in my class like cares about the environment and stuff like that. But to get to your question, which is what they could do.
Well, how do you feel about that, Tara? I mean, do you feel the same way at your age, or are you frustrated by that, or?
Yeah, I'm kind of frustrated with them because they don't process it the same way that I do. Because, yeah, sure, everyone's seeing COVID as a really emergency problem, but actually climate change and stuff is working behind the scenes, and it's going to affect much more than just millions of people.
Yeah.
It's not going to affect us. It's not only going to affect us, but it's going to affect the whole world as well. And then, like, people say we don't have enough money for renewing everything, and then suddenly we pull out millions and millions of dollars out of nowhere for COVID.
Mhm. Yeah, well, there are billions, hundreds of billions, trillions of dollars sitting on the sidelines that could be put to good use in terms of achieving the Sustainable Development Goals and the climate crisis. So yeah, lots of work to do.
Thank you, darling, for joining us.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Darshita, could you also answer the part about how you can encourage young ladies who are in a similar position as you were?
Yes.
Mhm.
For me, I think what helped me personally was, although I had challenges, I always parked them to the side and I said, if I didn't have the challenge, what would I be doing? And then I asked myself, okay, if I would be doing that, then what can I do to be able to still do that, even though I have the challenges? So I never said no in face of the challenge. And the way I describe it is live your life from vision, not from circumstance. And that's what I would say to any person, whether it's man, woman, or non-gender, is the circumstance doesn't define what you do next. It actually is just there to tell you the level of challenge you're up against and the kind of resources you need to have around you, whether it's in terms of people or just moral support you need to help make those big decisions and move forward. But the key thing is just keep moving forward and not accepting a no. I always say no is a yes in disguise.
I agree with you.
Yeah.
So,
I have a question.
Jackie, yeah.
Darshita, I love the way Tara dropped in and gave this piece of profound wisdom like an old soul. And then we see her in the background kicking her legs up in the sky. I love that. It's so beautiful. And it speaks to, the profundity of women's leadership, the notion to drop in and be wise and yet be playful at the same time. What do you do with everything that you were involved in, all of this heavy lifting? What do you do to keep your sanity and to be playful in your own life?
I play Indian classical violin. I've been practicing that for 5 years and I still screech at it. So for me, it's about constantly doing something that I know I'm not good at and being able to laugh at myself and being able to be laughed at by others. I think it's important not to feel self-important about everything. So I always try to do something where I know I'm clumsy or I'm never going to master it, but still keep at it. I grew up a very shy person. So if we were around the Zoom call 5-10 years ago, I wouldn't know how to even start with one sentence lucidly. So I have spent a lot of time in self-reflection and in speaking to myself about why what I have to say matters. And I personally think a lot of women, because of social conditioning, especially in the southern part of the hemisphere, we don't speak up. and it's just about being able to find that voice that can speak to power with respect, but also speak to power with power, and still be equanimous, because it's not about charge. I don't think just fighting it out is going to solve our challenges. So I always, even when I have confrontational conversations with people where I feel part of me just wants to say, okay, have it your way, and just go back and find another opportunity, I know that that's not going to solve the challenge we have. So finding that voice that allows you to confront in a way that feels congruent with yourself, I think is a very important skill that I would say young people can learn, and especially women can learn a lot.
Darcy put in the chat a quote from you, which is so beautiful, and we will hold on to, which is live your life from vision, not circumstance. And that really is just so beautiful. You've challenged us to think bigger, and we always wrap up our conversations with 2 questions. And one is, what are 3 calls to action that anyone can do?
So first thing is reduce consumption in any shape or form that you can think of for any person. Second is, if you still want to consume, which is absolutely fine, I do as well, is find a greener and a more long-term solution for it. And sometimes it's price versus real price. And this is something which I learned from saying sayonara to Zara some time ago, and really investing in 1 or 2 clothes a year, but that I know they're legacy pieces that Tara and her grandchildren can wear. So it's that, sort of consuming less, consuming greener. And I think the most important thing we can all do is making sustainability stylish and popular. So using our social media channels to speak about how we made a different choice, and making that a trend, making that something to celebrate, and making that and giving more power to that. So yeah.
It's beautiful. Yes. Yeah. We will celebrate that. And finally, what advice do you have for other women and girls who want to make a difference? Anything specific to women and girls?
Yep. Live your life from vision, not from circumstance. And another little one I've always sort of anchored myself is love it, leave it, or change it.
Love it.
Yeah.
Okay, that's great. We're so grateful to you, Darshi, for being part of our Valentine's Day celebration and beyond. You make our hearts full and our heads too. So thank you for being with us. We're just very grateful. And
Darshi, I hope this is just the first of the conversations. There is so much synergy here, and I just applaud everything that you've shared with us, what you're doing, and know that if there's any way we can be of support, of help, to walk by your side with you, we are here.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it.
What happens when a woman takes power? What happens when she won't back down? What happens when a woman takes power? What happens? What happens? What happens when a woman takes power?